Joanie, welcome to the World XP podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you want to do a bit of an elevator pitch for the people who you are and what you do and kind of what we'll be talking about today, and then we'll jump into the question from the last guest as always, and then just hop right into it.
That sounds great. Yeah, so my name is Joanie Bily, and I have spent the last 30 years in the employment and staffing industry. Maybe people can relate to that. Think of like a recruiter. That's the field that I come from. And I have, worked in this industry for 30 years for different companies doing professional staffing. Most recently was with Employbridge, where we focused on kind of the supply chain industry. And I also sit on the board of directors for the American Staffing Association, and last year was the chair of the board. So really have just grown up in this industry and know a lot about employment and the workforce and trends, and it's just been a passion for me because I get the chance to help people, right, and really connect people with whether it's their first job or their next job, and connect companies with great people. So I feel very fortunate that I kind of fell into this business.
Yeah, 100%. So the question is, what's the best book that you've read this year? Or we can make it in the last year, because we're not that far into the year. But what's the best book you've
Wow,
read recently?
the best book. So I'm going to show it to you because this one, have you heard of it? The 5 a.m. Club.
Mm-mm, I've not heard of it.
It's about, it says own your mornings and elevate your life. And it's an interesting book. It's by Robin Sharma, one of the best sellers. Robin's written a bunch of other books, but this one is one of my favorites. And the reason is I think it kind of got me back to some basics of making sure that you want to take control of your life. And the premise of the book is get up early and start your day out right. And you can get so much more accomplished than so many other people. But you really just set your day off on the right path. It's very focused on goals and achievement. And as you know, I also wrote my own book.
You
So
did indeed.
so it's the second one, like I have a copy here, but dive in deep. And my book also had some similarities to the book, The 5 a.m. Club, which is just about like you're in control. You're in the driver's seat of your career, of your life. And it's really trying to motivate people to embrace that and dive into their best life, and its strategies on how you can do that. So the best book is 5 a.m., but I'll also give myself a shout out and say Dive in Deep is a good one too.
Yeah, definitely. So the what was the inspiration to write that book? Because I think there's a lot of I don't know if self-help is the right phrase, but I'll use it for lack of a better one that I can think of at the moment. There's loads of these like, okay, you take charge of your own career, or this is the best 5 things to do if you want to break into this industry, or even like this is how you ace the job interview, or this is how you do all these. There's like so many things out there. And so like for example, for me when I was starting the podcast, I was like, oh, there's already gazillions of podcasts, what's just one more? But like what was for you the thing that was like, oh, I have something else to add to this that I haven't seen before?
Well, I have to say that because I'm in the employment and recruiting industry, it's just been a natural for people to come to me and ask for advice.
Mm-hmm.
And many times I have parents coming to me and asking advice, for their children, their high school children, their college children, thinking about careers and what are the industries that are going to be best to go into and where are going to be the job opportunities. But I wanted to write the book to really give people advice for anywhere they are in any stage of their career. It could be early, it could be maybe mid-career and they're thinking about a change or a pivot. Maybe they're thinking about, an early retirement, but they still want to do something after and think about like what's next. So because people have always kind of naturally come to me asking for advice, I thought, why not write a book? I do a lot of public speaking, on the labor market and employment trends and the workforce, and just decided that it was time for me to do it. So I got serious about it really during COVID. I started writing a lot more during COVID. And it took me a while, though, to kind of pull it together, and then officially launched the book in May of 2023.
Mm. I feel like a lot of people did things like that during COVID. Yeah, the podcast for me as well was during COVID. It's like I'm locked inside. I might as well do something with
Exactly.
my
Yeah,
time. Um,
exactly. We had a little bit more time, and we had to think about how we wanted to use it. And
yeah,
so look at you, like starting a podcast that's really taken off. Um,
yeah.
it's like when you lean into something and give it your effort and time and dedication, it does require time. And a lot of us didn't really have that maybe before COVID, but I believe that COVID made us stop and kind of think differently about how we were going to use our time.
Yeah, time management, how it's structured, how kind of efficiently we can do certain things, especially with AI showing up. Like I use AI all the time for video editing and all sorts of stuff. Um, and on that note, speaking of like the parents with maybe high school or college kids that come to ask you for advice, I feel like just observing that the world that we live in is gonna be drastically different very soon, whether it's what the Trump administration is doing regarding kind of trying to reset global trade and supply chains and things of that nature,
Yep.
or AI. You hear people say, okay, well, AI is going to drive all the trucks in 5 years or whatever the statement is. And there's all these sorts of things. And so for young people who are kind of looking to figure out, okay, do I need a degree? There's lots of companies now that are like, I don't care if you have a degree. I just want to know that you can do the job. Like
Mhm.
what are you seeing? What are some of the trends that you're seeing, and what are some ways maybe that people can, well, I guess we can let's separate that out because there's going to be a lot in there. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing as far as the transitions? Like I get the feeling, especially like with media as well, with everything. It's like stuff, things are changing. Like it's people are going to have to figure it out and be very adaptable. What are some of the things that you're seeing in the labor force, labor market, um, that kind of can speak to that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I do get this question often right now because things are changing so rapidly. 5 years ago, when someone asked me this question, it was our robots really going to take over, and then you look at where we are today with AI and robotics and how that's impacting jobs. You can see that over the last 5 years, many jobs have actually been eliminated or decreased. We're seeing some big changes, certainly in like the lower level skilled jobs that in the staffing and recruiting industry, you could almost call it like you would just walk up and do the job. You didn't have to have education or training, and they were low level, low paying jobs. Many of those jobs have gone away, and they're not coming back because they have been replaced with robotics and AI. And we look at like right now, even what's happening in call centers and contact centers where you used to have people that really focus on customer service, whether it was inbound calls or outbound calls, that is changing rapidly with advancements in AI. And you really do have, almost like virtual um, contact center agents that are the calls are really done by AI until they get maybe to a certain point. If it's something very specialized, then a person, may take over at that point.
Hmm.
And that's just one sector. So you mentioned media. The media industry is changing rapidly as well. A lot of writers, those jobs have really gone away. Marketing has changed as well. The creative world, so much can be done by technology. However, there are other jobs that are being created by AI and robotics. And then we also have, people in those fields that can also do their job better. And we're driving productivity up in many sectors because they have these tools and they didn't have them before. So it is a bit complicated. No one can predict exactly how this is all going to play out, 100%. What's concerning is that many of our, universities, across the country, they really haven't been teaching AI. So all of a sudden, we're starting to see new programs and advancements in the colleges and universities across the country because there's been a bit of a gap that they haven't been teaching the students how AI is going to impact their industry. How does it impact computer programming? It used to be that you might need to have 100 programmers to get something done. And now maybe you just need more of like a manager or director that can oversee the work, that AI has done to make sure it's been done correctly and can be applied correctly. So, so much is changing. And, when I speak to students about, where careers are going to be, you really have to think of the importance of people interaction that can't be replaced by AI. There's still a lot of great jobs in the trades, for example. Plumbers cannot be replaced by AI or robotics. Electricians, there's going to be demand in those jobs that don't require necessarily a college degree, but maybe some specialized trade and training to get them ready, apprenticeship programs, those types of things. But there's a lot of opportunity there too. So though, like I'll wrap this up and let you go to your next question. But
Hmm.
I would say, though many jobs have gone away, there's still going to be plenty of opportunities, and we are not going to be completely replaced by AI.
Yeah. What are you seeing in terms of, or what do you think, I guess, in terms of the supply and demand factor of like the trades that you mentioned, right? Like as people, because there's two things that go kind of into this. One is kind of in the late 1900s, like moving into the 2000s, there was a lot of cheap labor shipped offshore into foreign markets to get cheap manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. And then
Right.
also it seemed that these kind of trade jobs that you mentioned, at least this is anecdotal, my observation. I would say that they are maybe less desired, if that's the right kind of characterization. And so, from a supply and demand perspective, in terms of, okay, well, now actually I really need this plumber, so I'm gonna, if they're really good, I'm gonna have to pay them a boatload of money. Is that something that we're seeing? And then also, do you think that, at least from the US perspective, that we have the labor force to shift back into some of these other things, right? If policy from the administration brings manufacturing back, like we as the US haven't really done so much of that in the last 20-ish years, whatever the time frame is. I'm sure my dates are slightly off, but the point being, like, do we have the labor force to shift into some of these things? Because it seems to be like the gig economy of, okay, I'm gonna drive Uber, or I'm gonna do DoorDash, or I'm gonna do like, I think there's some stat that, like, if you ask kids, their most wanted job is to be like a famous TikToker or something like that. And so like
Yes,
this,
I've seen that too.
yeah, and so
Survey.
like going from, okay, I want to be a TikToker, to actually, but if you're a really good plumber, you make bank. Like,
Right.
where is that shift happening, and is it happening in the universities at all, or like it seems like a big kind of broader societal issue that we have to solve for. And I'm not sure that I've seen in my own observations the steps taken to like move towards that. So it feels like we're going to be in a bit of a rut, at least until it shakes out a little bit. Is that what you're seeing? Are you in agreement with that? Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I do have some thoughts on that, and there's a few factors. Going back, I even think to myself, I've been out of college for over like 30 years, which sometimes hard to believe. Time flies. But when I went to school, and I remember being in high school, and we were doing those tests to think about, okay, what are you good at, and where are your interests? But the message was always, you need to go to college and get your degree. you need to go to, and even if it was get your associate's degree and then your bachelor's degree, but it was get a college degree was the message that I think my generation and certainly other generations received. And we did get away from giving students the option of really promoting it, I think, as a society, that the trades are a great opportunity. College is not for everyone. And so if it wasn't going to study, a specific major, at a university, maybe going into a trade or doing an apprentice program could really be a great option. And I do believe, to your question, that as a society, we did a bad job of that. We started pushing everyone to colleges and didn't give other options, for them. And so that probably added to the stigma of like, are the trades really a good, opportunity? I think that's changing, but it's going to take some time to catch up. I think now people are realizing, that the trades can pay a six-figure income very quickly. And in addition to that, there is a strong demand for people in the trades, electricians and plumbers, construction. There are needs today, and there are certainly going to be needs next year and 5 years from now and 10 years from now. So that has to change, and we need to do a better job of educating students in grammar school and in high school about options, certainly of where they'll be able to go and what are their interests. Some people really like working with their hands. They don't want to be behind a desk. Their minds might be more mechanical, but maybe they don't need to necessarily go into the engineering field. Maybe this, being an electrician or something could be a good option. So I think as a society, we have to do a better job of that. As parents, we're going to have to do, certainly a better job of that as well. But then people still need to think about what their interests are, what are they good at, and then how does that match up with where the demand is going to be in the future. I still believe we will have a labor shortage in this country. We have low birth rates, and we have many people that are, aging out of the workforce. And so overall, if you look at the whole workforce, even with the impact of AI and robotics, we are not going to have enough people to do the jobs that are required in the future. So we will have certainly a supply of talent and a shortage of labor.
Mm. Do you at all look at the effects of like regulation on entrepreneurship or construction? The reason I bring this up is the last episode we were talking about some of the, I was like, if you could wave a magic wand and kind of sort out the way to rebalance the economy. One of the things that was brought up was in construction in particular, it's so hard to build anything because you've got to get a gazillion permits before you do anything, and so people just don't even want to bother. And so construction was one of the things that you mentioned. Is there, is that something that you look into at all or not so much?
Um, I'm not an expert in that field by any means, but I can tell you from um, even, I think about just even if you look at what's happening in California, right? And
Hmm.
since the fires in LA, how challenging it has been due to bureaucracy of, trying to get permits, and they couldn't even get things cleaned up before they could even start to think about rebuilding. That we have some challenges as, and it's at the state level, it's at the local level. We need to run more efficiently. And, I live in Fort Lauderdale, in an area called Lighthouse Point. I do live on the water, and we're dealing with like just trying to redo our seawall and our bulkhead, and the permit process takes forever. And I keep questioning, like, why is it this complicated? Like, I understand the safety and the building codes and things have to be done to a certain standard. All of that is so important, but it's not efficient. And somehow that needs to be improved at the local, at the state level, so that we can move faster, because it's like we can't get out of our own way. But again, I'm not an expert in that field,
Yeah.
but I've dealt with it personally, and it's frustrating.
Well, the reason I bring it up is like the incentive structure. If you want people to move into these areas of labor, but you make it so difficult to do anything, then people are not going to want to do it. So that's kind of where I was going with that, and I don't even know. It's like even to smart. Go ahead.
Yeah, but there's still, even with that, right? You're on to something there, because that could only drive more demand, certainly, if
Hmm.
we could figure that out. But even today, we still don't have enough people in the trades to get the work done. So work does take longer to get done as well.
Yeah, I was wondering as well. Oh, I had another question and it slipped off the top of my head. Um, that's all right. So in terms of, I guess like I was listening to one of your podcasts from last year about the labor report that gets pushed out by, I guess, the Department of Labor, I would assume. Um, some of those I have looked at a few of them, um, and I don't really know how to make heads or tails out of a lot of things because, especially recently, you'd see a labor report come out and you'd have one side saying, well, we created all these jobs, and then the other side being, well, these are bounce back jobs from COVID, so they don't really count. And then you'd have somebody else saying, yeah, but like, what does that unemployment rate really mean? Like, who counts as being in the workforce and not in the workforce? And like, people mess with the percentages here and there to, right? Statistics is something that if you're good at statistics, you can make the stats say whatever you want them to say, by and large. How would you advise people to like look at these things and then also look at some of the trends and maybe figure out like, oh, I remember the other question. So, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll do this one first and then we'll go back to the other one. But how should people be reading these sorts of things and be looking at some of these trends and trying to like if somebody's in college or whatever and they're like, I'm not really sure what I want to do, but like maybe I go look at this industry or whatever.
Yeah.
Or like or for people being concerned like, oh, unemployment's so high. It's like, well, what do these things actually mean?
Yeah. Well, no, I do think people should use the data, and maybe it's not 100% accurate. It's very interesting. The report comes out the first Friday of the month, but then they also revise the two prior months. So the first Friday of the month, you're getting job data, and it's amazing that like millions and millions of dollars are traded, right, based on what the report says. The Federal Reserve is using this data as well to think about, do they need to lower interest rates, based on what's happening with the labor market. But then the data gets revised anyway. So yeah, how accurate is it overall? Well, I think some people would agree with you and maybe challenge that as well. However, if you look at the overall trends, you can see some interesting information in that data. You can tell which sectors have been adding jobs for the last few years. So, for example, the healthcare sector has been one of the best performing sectors, certainly for over 5 years. Since really even before COVID, jobs were being created. There's a demand for nurses. Nurses has been the number one job posting, and physician assistants and physical therapists, nurses aides. Like if you looked at the top 10 jobs for probably the last 10 years, most of those job titles are going to be, in that area. So healthcare is a great field. And even if someone isn't interested, like I could never be a nurse or a doctor, just I see a cut and almost pass out. But the healthcare sector, you could still do a lot of things. You might be in accounting and finance and want to go work in the healthcare industry, and know that that's going to be a pretty safe place to land, and there'll be opportunities, in that sector. So I do think using data like that can really help you decide, okay, where are there going to be growth opportunities? What sectors are adding jobs? What industries are doing well? The retail sector is a sector that I would probably steer people away from. It's just changed so much in the last 10 to 15 years, and we've continued to see kind of a decline of jobs and kind of the size of the workforce in that area. So overall, I think the data can help you, with thinking about where the jobs are being created and what the trends are saying about that.
Yeah, I think Amazon killed killed the retail ones. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, so the question that I just remembered was um and this kind of goes with the accountant working in healthcare. But if you are not really sure what you're interested in, I think if you asked a lot of people, one, they don't know how to go about figuring that out. Because
Mm-hmm.
generally, when people ask me, I'm like, well, you have to try stuff. And then if you don't like it, then at least you know you don't like that. And then you can check one off the box and you can move on. But the problem is, at least as I see it, with jobs is like, well, I need some experience to get the job. But if I have no experience to get the job, I can't get the job in the first place. And then how am I supposed to figure out exactly what I like to do if I need all this experience to get even one job? And then people feel kind of stuck, I feel like. So, what would you recommend for kind of ideal ways for people to explore in the labor market for like a career, various interests without kind of either getting stuck or like how do you avoid that scenario where you can actually really, right? And the other thing is like if you go intern someplace, like sometimes you don't really get the full picture of what it is. You're getting coffee for people or you're just doing busy work or something. So like
Right.
what would you recommend or what advice would you give for people in that sort of situation?
Well, I love this question because this actually comes back to really why I wrote the book.
Mm.
And when I say dive in deep, deep actually stands for design, experience, execute, and persevere. And so it's the exact question you're asking is that first phase is you really need to think about designing what you might want to do. What are your interests? What are you good at? What classes were you really good at in school, whether it was high school or college? What are things that you excelled at or come naturally to you? And then you have to think about like what kind of purpose do you want to live out? What's important to you? How do you want to make a difference in this world? And I tell people all the time, try to find that job you love. You might not love 100% of it, but it's hard to figure that out. So that design phase is really important. And to your point, the way to do that is you have to try different things. And if you're struggling with that, it's you could work with a temporary staffing agency and try to like work with them and say what kind of jobs do you have and do temp or contract or gig work kind of in that field to try to get some experience. If you have the luxury of being able to volunteer in an industry, you can certainly look at that. I've actually worked with people that want to change jobs and they have a full-time job, but they're thinking of changing industries and they volunteer maybe in a different industry while they're still working full time just to see do they like this industry better. If they were to take their skills and kind of transfer them to something else, volunteering might be a good option. But that's about that first really in the deep process is you have to gain experience because that's when you're going to figure out what you like and what you don't like. And I'll use this analogy of with kids. When my kids were real little, I put them in every sport, just to kind of see what did they like. They played soccer. My daughter did dance and horseback riding. My son was doing football and baseball and golf and basketball and all these different things, right? That they tried when they were real little. But eventually they kind of gravitated towards what interests them the most. And by the time they were in later in grammar school and then in high school, they kind of had like their one thing that they were really good at and they kind of stuck with and they went all in, right? Because they had that experience. And then when they were getting ready for college, I made sure that both of them went to a college where they were required to do an internship or a co op program because I didn't want either one of them graduating with their college degree coming out and saying, well, I don't have any experience and I don't know what to do. And I don't even know if I like my major. So I wanted them to gain that experience while they were in school. So I would recommend if someone's, a student and still has that luxury, volunteering, internships, co-ops, get experience and decide what you like and what you don't like. Because then you do have to pick a lane and you need to say, okay, this is my lane and this is what I'm going to do. Not that you can't change someday, but you want to pick that lane. And then that's where you get into that execution phase where you really want to put all your effort and try different stretch assignments and different things that you can do to advance yourself. But it's kind of going through that design and experience phase that actually is going to help you get there.
Yeah, that makes total sense. For me at least, the internship that I had in college between my junior and senior years, I think I'd learned more about myself and then also what I wanted to do with my life in that summer. Um,
What did
and
you do? Just out of curiosity.
yeah, so I was working for the county that I live in. They've got kind of a fleet of trash trucks, and so I was doing GIS for the county, and their routing system was still on paper, and this was in 2000
Oh,
like
wow.
16 or whatever. It's like, okay, you
Uh-huh.
guys don't know how to use computers, man? Come on. So I basically created the whole new route system essentially in this GIS software called ArcGIS, and then we got it sorted out, divided up the houses, and made the routes more efficient and stuff. And then
Wow.
actually they had some. I still have the somewhere. I still have the certificate. The project won like at the Fairfax County government like thing. It won like some prize for it, and this was like short. This was like later in the fall after I'd gone back to school. But the people that
Wow.
I worked for like sent me the pictures of it and all that stuff, and so that was cool.
That's
Um,
so, yeah, like
yeah.
you made a difference, right?
Exactly. It was very tangible as well because I got to go back. So the GIS guys, they didn't. So I was going between the truck shop where like all the trash trucks were stationed and stuff, and the like big fancy office building where all the GIS guys were, because none of the trash guys wanted to go to the see the suits at the government center, and none of the government center wanted to go see the trash trucks. So they were like, okay, you do it. So
Wow.
I got to see both worlds, got to like drive along on the routes sometimes, and like once you get past the smell, it's not too bad. Um,
And they
but it
make
was
good money, don't they?
yeah,
Right?
yeah, they
Yeah, they
do,
make
yeah,
decent money.
and the
Yeah.
overtime is good.
But that's interesting, Eric, because you got to see a broad spectrum, right,
Hmm.
through that. And I bet you realized, what you might not want to do, like what would
Hmm.
be some things that you wouldn't want to do, but maybe what would be some things that you would want to do. That's a really great internship that you had that exposure.
Yeah, 100%. And so and then they liked the project so much that when like later in the spring semester when I was a senior, I needed to finish up for a capstone project. And I reached back out and I was like, "Hey, did you guys finish this?" And they're like, "No." I was like, "Do you want me to come back and finish it?" They're like, "Yes, please." So
That's
so
great.
so I got the capstone out of that as well, and it was a really cool experience because like you mentioned, I got to figure out the things that I was good at, which I ended up being very good at a go-between, which was like explaining the GIS concepts to the trash guys, and then explaining the trash concepts to the GIS guys, even though I knew nothing about trash for like a year prior. Um, but it
But
was it was really cool. Go
yeah,
ahead.
and you excelled certainly in communication skills with that, dealing and being able to talk to different people at different levels.
Hmm.
And look what you're doing today, like, with a podcast, right? You talk to all different types of people. So it is interesting that that was something you were probably really, really good at a very early age.
Well, I don't know. I think my parents would might beg to differ. But that's all right. No, I joke, I joke. But
Uh,
yeah, exactly that. And I got to hone those skills and got to talk to all
yeah,
sorts of different people. And at the trash shop, they called me the map kid, which I thought was funny.
yeah,
Some of them didn't like it because they had been doing the same route for like 20 some odd years or whatever. It's like, sorry, man, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just here. Um,
right. But
but yeah,
that's interesting too, because you think about how much technology is changing the world of work today. And you have a lot of people, right, that maybe were out in the field that didn't want those changes. And then you have to go through change management and be like, hey, if you don't embrace this, right, you're probably going to be out of a job. So it's real world. It's
yeah.
real world, real experience, and that sounds like a great internship.
Yeah, and then to kind of extrapolate from the like people in the field examples, like you have to give them enough um input because they're the ones that are actually doing the work. And
Mm-hmm.
if somebody's just in a high rise somewhere making decisions and they don't know what's really going on the ground level, that's not great either. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
so going on the ride-alongs was super important to figure out like, okay, how actually should I, like for example, um, there's a trash truck that's got a sidearm and it can only pick cans up from the right side of the street. So you have to map it in such a way that it hits all the streets, but only one side at a time. Like they can't just go up and down and get the whole street.
Right.
And so, um, to figure that out and then to see some of like, okay, this cul-de-sac is a real pain in the butt because there's a dead end over there and we can't actually do it this way. Like on my computer screen, I don't see that. And so that was a good kind of learning experience for like, okay, even though it looks this way in the mapping software, we can't actually do it this way because, like, for example, there was one where there was like a fire hydrant and a big tree in the way, and so he had to like go around over there and do some other thing, and it's like you would never know, and so that it kind of
Yeah,
just to extrapolate off that in like the corporate world, these are things, the communication between upper level management and the workforce needs to be there because otherwise then you miss stuff like that and you create
absolutely.
problems where there wouldn't have been any prior.
Yeah, it's so true. Communication is one of the most important things, and AI really can't completely like eliminate that. Like the personal communication is so important, and collaboration, I think, goes along with that as well. It's like you had to collaborate, right, with
Hmm.
the people at corporate and the people in the field, and that's real world. Have you ever seen that show Undercover Boss?
I've
It's
seen clips of it, yeah.
yeah, clips of it. Not that I watched every episode, I've seen a few of them, but I always found it interesting, like when the CEO of a company kind of went undercover and was out in the field, and really, like, they had their eyes open more than the workers, knowing that that was the boss. I think it gave a different perspective. So, could you imagine if more executives tried to put themselves truly in the shoes, right, or truly relate to what's happening and what some of the challenges are? I think we would get more innovation, more collaboration, and solutions, right?
Yeah.
And then the best result from that is when things like that happen, you build trust and you build culture, which ultimately builds productivity in a company. And so we need more people, the old saying, right? Get out of the ivory tower. It's so true. So, so true.
Yeah. The other piece to that is as well talking about like the human to human connection. You mentioned call centers earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Like while they might be cheaper to have AI run it, the amount of times that, and you probably experienced this as well, where like you're going through 27 menu options and then at the end like you pick the wrong one and it hangs up and it's like I'm going to throw my phone through the
Yeah,
wall. It's like
right. We've all
if
been there. Yes.
yeah, and it's like okay, the company that maybe takes slightly less in profit but maybe has like people who are very good at talking to people on the other end, all of a sudden it's like yeah, you might charge like a couple percentage points more for whatever your product is. But if I know that if something goes wrong, I get to talk to a real person who will actually solve my problem. Like, I mean, personally speaking, I would go for that one almost every single time, obviously depending on what the product is. But like,
Yeah.
so and that kind of goes back to the undercover boss thing. It's like, do you see what your customers are experiencing? It's like every time they want to throw their phone through the wall when they're trying to get a hold of anyone. It's like that. Well, that's not good either.
Right,
So yeah, it's super interesting, kind of the way things have panned out, and yeah, the human to human. Like if you talk to somebody on the phone, like you're trying to solve a problem or whatever with some like let's say you're trying to return something and you don't know what the return policy is, and you call them, the customer service, and it's a real person who like really helps you, you leave that with a good feeling instead of just f- for returns press 5 boop. It's
right.
like you leave
Yeah,
that with such a better feeling than the menu options, and it's like it feels like that would be a worthwhile investment for customer retention. But that's, I mean, I don't know, that's not my field. It's just my own personal kind of.
yeah. Well, it is. It's all about that customer experience, and technology hasn't been able to really solve for that yet. Maybe in some scenarios, it's easy, but like I find it really easy to return something on Amazon. I can
Yeah,
go to the app. They have perfected that process where it's pretty easy for the
it
most
is.
part.
Yeah.
But to your point, if you really have a problem and you need to speak with a human that can help you, you want that option.
Yeah, 100%. So speaking of kind of your human to human experience, how did you end up with like the keynote speaking and the public speaking and things of that nature? What was like the first one like? Was that something that you wanted to try, or was it somebody had reached out and been like, "Hey, can you come talk to these people about this thing?" Or like, how did that even start?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Being in employment and the labor market, it's always a hot topic. People want to know what's happening. Are we adding jobs? Are companies starting to lay off? What's happening with the economy? And so a company I was working for at the time, this is going back, gosh, probably try to think. I would say maybe over 15 years ago. So I was probably like at a halfway point in my career from when I had started in the industry. And we were talking about the labor market and what was happening, kind of in the labor market. And I would speak to customers regularly about that topic and would share insights and research with them. And the true story is that I was working for a company called Adecco, and the CEO of Adecco was supposed to be on television to talk about the labor market. At the time, I lived in New York, and he couldn't make it. He couldn't make it for like a segment on TV. And the chief marketing officer of the company asked me to fill in for him. And I said, me? Like, I've never been on television. I don't have any training for that. And he said, it's 5 minutes. You go on, you'll talk about this, just talk about your experience and what you're seeing in the labor market. And so I did it. And I, kind of did it and thought, okay, well, there's my 5 minutes of fame. I was on national television, talking about it, and filled in for the CEO and thought that was it. But what happened was the next time the studio needed someone, when they called back, they said, hey, we'd love to have you guys on again, but instead of having your CEO, can we just have Joanie back? She did a really, really great job. And so the CEO always teased me about that. But one thing led to another, and it just was something that I enjoyed doing. I think when you enjoy something, you can, be good at it. And then I just got better and better at it and did it more and more.
Were you live in studio for that, or was this?
I was live in studio. Yeah.
Okay, first you walk into the studio. What's it like? You see kind of on TV, or sometimes they give you like the background shots of like the 1 trillion cameras and the
Yeah.
people scurrying around and all that stuff. Like you walk in and like what's going through your head? Are you like nervous, excited, both? Like
Yeah, like I was so nervous. Absolutely. I remember walking in and they, did take me because it was Fox News and Fox Business News. So it was right on 6th Avenue, in New York City, right across from Radio City Music Hall. And walked in and, you know, there was the green room where you could sit and have a cup of coffee or a water or something, and then they put you into hair and makeup to just touch you up real quick. And all I remember, Eric, is it happened all so quick. It was just like, okay, come here, do this. They walked me into the studio where they would be filming live. And, it's just like a room, pretty good sized room. And the cameras and everything are all around you and bright lights. And it's freezing cold because of all of the lights and everything they have in there. You sit in the seat, they put the microphone on you and they like count you down, go live. It went so fast. Did the interview with the host of the show. And then as soon as that segment was over, they're like, okay, mic off. And they, scoot you right out of there. So it happened so quickly that it was almost so good. Like I wasn't able to be that nervous because it was so fast paced.
Mm. Did you have any sort of like imposter syndrome type deal going into that? Like, I'm not even supposed to be here. Like, who am I to talk about these
Oh,
things on Fox?
absolutely.
How
Absolutely.
how'd you get did that take a little while for you to get? Because I on your website it's like you've done that sort of thing a bunch of times. So did it
Yeah.
take a while to?
It did. I think it did, made me feel funny. Like my old CEO, Tig, who used to do it, like he was on, CNBC and other shows quite often and was just really good at it. And I certainly felt like, oh, well, I'm not the CEO, right? I don't have his credentials, to go in and to do this. But then what I realized, and you do have to like self-talk to yourself that I've been in this industry at the time, it had been 15 years, and I'm the expert in the labor market. And I know more about the employment market than the host does or really anyone else there because, like, this is my field. So, as long as they were asking me something about the employment market and the labor market, I was really comfortable. And after I did it a few times, and then it always helps, right? When everyone says, wow, you're really good at this. Like, we want to have you on more often, and that kind of changed when you start getting the calls of like, can you come on like once a week? And then even while I lived in New York, like there were
Hmm.
times I was going on television 3 times a week, and then they want me on for a whole hour for the program. So that does a lot for your confidence at that point. But it took time. It definitely took time.
What time frame was this when you started to go on more frequently?
I was on really frequently. I would say it was probably maybe it was about 10 years ago because I 10 or 11 years ago because I still lived in New York. So I was going in and out of the city regularly. I lived out on Long Island. But then then I still did it remotely and I still would travel up there often. COVID really changed things.
Hmm.
And now everything's done just like you and I are doing this, podcast today.
Hmm.
You could do it from a computer, from a laptop. And I still go on regularly, at least once a month. And now I go to a local studio when I do like national TV. I like to be in a studio, but I'm
Yeah.
not going to New York. So
Yeah,
it's very
no, that's
different.
it's too cold. No, 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 not doing that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
in that time frame, were you starting to see kind of the um division or like when I don't really watch the news, but some of the clips that I watch, it seems very like there's things that people are looks like they're not supposed to say or like where did you get any like hey don't talk about this thing because it makes a certain entity or institution look not so great or like
Yeah.
did you get that vibe or anything like that?
Well, I'll tell you what was interesting. Before President Trump was elected the first time,
Mm-hmm.
it was getting very, very divided. And at that time, I started doing one show that was a 3 hour show. It went
Mm-hmm.
live at 6 a.m. and wrapped up at 9 a.m. on the business channel. It was Mornings with Maria. I will tell you, the program never said you can say this or can't say that. They allowed you, to really say what you wanted to. But then it became a situation where we weren't just talking about the labor market, right? We were talking about the price of oil. We were talking about the election, anything that was happening in the economy. And at the time, I was working for Employbridge. And so it became a bit of an awkward situation for me personally because I was representing a company. And so I had my own brand, but I was, a president with Employbridge. And you have to be very careful there about what you say and what you don't say. And so I remember going to the network and saying to them, I've loved this opportunity, being on for 3 hours, and talking about what's happening across the board. However, I'm not an independent person, so I need to be really careful about what I say and what I can't say. And so I asked them if I could just switch back to
Hmm.
just talking about the labor market. And so I did. And it was at a time where it was starting to get very heated and I couldn't take a side. I had to stay pretty neutral.
Yeah, no, of course. And that's kind of, I guess, what I was getting at is because there's people that they tried to be very neutral, and then either side would say, well, your neutrality means that you're supporting the other side. And so, in a way, you're shooting yourself in both feet a little bit. But by the same token, you also had, like, I had a guy that was doing travel stuff for CNN on. I was like, and I asked him kind of similar. He was like, well, when we were doing travel stuff, we were more insulated from that sort of thing. But for you on Fox Business, especially, it seems like was that vibe around, or like what were the vibes like at that time? Because I would have been the first time around I was in college, and so people like at my college were starting to get a bit crazy, regardless of which way it was. And it's like it seemed like people were losing their minds, and then people were saying, "Oh, did you see this clip from this?" People like it was
Right.
very strange. And so
It,
for somebody like you were in the
yeah.
studio, like what was it like?
Well, you could definitely see that things were getting more heated, right? And it's pretty obvious, right? And I've been on CNBC and I've been on CNN as
Hmm.
well. So it just happens I've done more Fox and Fox
Yeah,
Business.
yeah. Well, any example from any of the three would be good because it's like it's the same phenomenon, just they believe different things.
Yeah, no, I think what you're seeing on television actually is what's happening and what they really believe. I think that those hosts that are on those shows really believe in the policy, whether you're on the right or the left. It would be hard for them to work for a network. And I think you see that sometimes when a host of a show leaves the network because they're not comfortable with kind of the direction or where that's headed. And that's happened on both sides. For me personally, I grew up with my mother was extremely conservative Republican. My father was in the union and was a Democrat. And so I had a registered, Republican as a mother, registered Democrat as a father. And I always just felt like I could be pretty middle of the road. So for me personally, never really was an issue. I feel like I can see both sides of things. And I feel blessed, that I was kind of raised that way. But I do think the country over time, just like the networks, have just gotten gone more to one side or the other. And it's challenging. It's really challenging. You need to find like, okay, where am I going to get my true source of what's really the truth? And I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm watching them both. I want to see what's this side saying, what's this side saying, and it's really
I'm just
really different.
watching neither.
That's probably the best advice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just don't
Just
watch
don't
it.
just don't watch anything. You'll be a much
Yeah.
happier person. Um, okay, so did after you went on the news, you transitioned to like the keynote speaking type situation where you're speaking for crowds and different crowds,
Yeah.
conferences, etc. How was that? How was the first one with that? Had you already been on the studio a couple times and already kind of got like cut your chops a little bit and you were comfortable with it, or was this still because like talking into a camera versus talking into like you can see all the faces if you say something and then they're all like ooh and then you have to like
Right.
adjust like how was that?
Yeah. I like talking to a camera much better because I don't know whether whether they like what I'm saying or not. It is very different with a live audience, right? And I think I've had to learn that my style up on stage in front of a live audience needs to be different than when I'm doing a keynote versus doing even a panel discussion, or if I'm on television. And I've had to learn that. I didn't go to school for that. This wasn't something I actually thought I was going to end up doing for a career. But I think you learn techniques on how to do that and how to engage with a live audience. And it's taken me some time, and I'm still working on it, and trying to refine my approach. But I do really love it because it's a chance to get a message out and truly, hopefully motivate people to think about their lives and their careers and what they want to do next. So I really, really do enjoy it.
Do you have like, do you watch them back, whether it's studio or some of the talks that you give? And then are you taking particular notes about how to better deliver a message in whatever format it is? Or is it kind of more um like unconscious, like like, because some people just kind of like they feel it out, and I've this audience feels better, it will, like, it feels like it'll work better this way, and usually it tends to work out, and then other people are very like prepared and things of that nature.
Right.
Which kind of end are you on? And then if it is is it the prepared end?
Well, first of all, before I go on, I think practice
Yeah.
is the most important thing you can do. You
Okay.
really do need to practice. Um, and, and I've always done better when I've truly practiced and even like recorded myself ahead of time and then watched it back. And then what you're talking about, I think, is taking it to a whole nother level where you really go back then and watch your performance or your speech, or if you're on television and say, oh, that's where I cringe. I, I hate watching myself, but that's the only way I'm going to get better, right? Is to look at it and say, oh, I really like that, or oh, wouldn't say that again, or do this differently. And I do think that that's important. If you want to grow and you want to do better, you have to analyze what you're doing right and what maybe you need to tweak.
Where did you figure out, like, or where did you make the conscious connection of like, okay, if I'm on a panel versus in studio versus talking to the conference, that the messages need to be packaged differently, because outside of like, you have more time when you're with the conference, or you have more time on the 3 hour show in the mornings with Maria, or like outside of like the time constraints, like the way that certain things are delivered can be the same message but packaged completely differently. Was that like the first time? So you've been on studio a bunch of times, you've been on Fox, been on CNN. The first time you talk to a conference, are you just like, oh, I know how to talk about these things and I'm doing it? Or were you already like, I need to package this differently because the setting is different?
Yeah, I think it took time and
Uh-huh.
experience. I think when you're a speaker, you need to be a really good storyteller.
Mm.
And you also have the gift of time, that you have a bit more time to tell that story and try to pull the audience in and engage, versus when you're on television and you're on for an interview where you only have a couple of minutes. You need to be very direct and succinct with what you want to say, and you don't have time. Many times you don't have time to tell that story. And so that is a skill, I think, that you need to learn, depending on, it's all about who's your audience. And it, you know, who's your audience is such a great thing to think about. It doesn't have to be television or speaking. It could be that job interview, knowing your audience, right? And maybe it's a business meeting that you're going on, and who's your audience? Are you packaging your message of what you're trying to deliver appropriately? And in order to do that, you need to know that audience, but then you also need to practice ahead of time. So you can apply all of this in life. You don't need to be a speaker or a
Yeah.
commentator on the news. I think, this is something that sometimes I worry a little bit about the younger generations that have grown up with their heads in their phones, and they've missed out on some really good basic communication skills, like talking to your teacher, talking to other students in the classroom, that those are things you really need to carry with you in your career, to set yourself up for success.
Yeah. With the internship especially, I couldn't get away from it's like I had to talk to people or I was not doing my job properly. So it's like, well, if you want to keep working, you better learn how to talk to all these people. It's like, okay, so well,
Yeah.
I guess I'll do that. Um, we haven't touched on job interviews, and my company has been I've been in a couple interviews recently with my company. Some have gone better than others. Um, and one of the things that like afterwards, I was talking to one of the people that did the interview with me, and she was like, "I don't understand why it's like this person didn't have an answer for like this question." And I agreed, and I was basically like, "Yes, we're asking you about you. Why can't you tell us about you?" But I guess from both ends, where what are some tips for both the interviewers like to get the information that they want? Like for example, um, I think it probably is difficult to figure out a person's work ethic through just talking to them. If they, because they can say whatever they want on the resume and they can give you all the like couched answers that you're supposed to give in the in the interview. Um, like, oh, what's your weakness? Oh, I care too much. It's like, okay, well, right, right. But like
Yeah.
from that end, like, what are some tips for the interviewers to kind of get maybe a good handle on some of the intangibles outside of maybe like feel like some people can just like feel it a little bit, but like,
Uh,
what are some good tips on the interviewing side to maybe get a handle on some of the more intangible things, like the
yeah.
teamwork or the work ethic or things of that nature?
Yeah, no, it's good question. I think digging into their experiences, that, whether things that are on their resume, but digging into those experiences by asking them questions to say, can you describe, what a day, in the week of this job really looked like? What were the things you were doing? What were the particular tasks, that you had to do? Can you share with me how you worked with others that were on the team or in the department with you? And what did that work look like? How did you work together? Did you experience challenges or obstacles in your role, and how did you handle them, or overcome them? So I think kind of digging into the work experience that they have on their resume and start asking those questions that involve a little bit more about the actual work, the tasks, the people that they had to interact with. You'll start to pull out a little bit more about what they actually did and their communication style, and how did they work with others, how did they deal with challenges. So I would recommend, digging into that. And I always like to ask people too, when I'm interviewing them, I like to ask them, tell me how your friends and family would describe your work ethic. I don't want to hear about your bosses, but what would your friends and family
Mm,
say about you? And it makes people just kind of like a pivot or a shift. They think about, oh, how would my family describe me, or my friends describe me? You usually get a pretty honest answer, with them about that. And then I love to ask, like, tell me something that's not on the resume. Tell me something that you've done, that you've accomplished, that's not on this piece of paper. What would you want me to know about you, that I haven't asked you, that you haven't had a chance to share? And if they're sitting there and saying, well, I can't think of anything, that would be a red flag,
yeah.
for me. It might be a hard question to answer, but give someone the time and space to think about it. But hopefully they can share a little bit more than what's just on the paper.
Yeah, those are super good. And the other thing that I've been trying to work on is like the question disguise a little bit is like disguising what I'm actually going after to avoid the like rehearsed super scripted things and trying to get them to open up. And that skill is particularly difficult, especially when like you're on a panel interviewing and maybe you need like in this format. like, well, I don't have to disguise anything in this situation because we're just talking, but like in a format like this where I've got an hour to to dig into whatever, then it becomes easier. But if you're in a panel and it's not like without leading somebody to the answer that you want, but disguising the question in a way that doesn't raise the like, okay, they've asked me about blank, this is my answer for blank.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a skill as well that I've been trying to work on. But on the other side, so if somebody is interviewing for the job, what are some, I don't know, I guess best practices maybe for people to leave a good impression?
Yeah, I think obviously we talked about being prepared and how that's just important in life. Certainly on an interview, I think you do need to be prepared. I I am going to say I would give a candidate the same advice I would give someone, let's say you, Eric, if you were going on television tomorrow, or if you're going on an interview tomorrow, I would say, what are the three things, the three key messages that you want to make sure that you get across in this interview? And know what they are, right? So if you're interviewing for a job and you want to talk about yourself, you want to make sure you know that by the time you walk out of the interview, you've done a good job of explaining your strengths, your experience, what you bring to the table, whatever those messages are, that you got that across to the person that's interviewing you. I think that's really important. The other thing I would say is make sure you have questions about the job, about the company, about what they're looking to hire in a person. Be prepared also with questions to ask. And hopefully you'll have the time in the interview and the process to do that. I can tell you when I'm interviewing someone for a job and wrap up the interview and I say to them, so do you have any questions for me? And if they say no, that's a red flag for me.
Yeah.
Like, why would you not have questions about this opportunity? And that would concern me that they're not really looking into it. So those would be some tips.
Yeah, those are good ones. Are you familiar with Chris Voss?
Chris Voss, no.
He's like used to be like the FBI head negotiator or a hostage negotiator or whatever. And he's
Okay.
got a couple super good ones. He's like he tells people to ask like what does success look like for this position?
Mhm.
Or then he's got
Love
some
that.
other one about being involved with strategic projects for like for the future of the company. He words it way better. I don't remember. I'm paraphrasing, but he's got a couple really good ones. So if people are interested, go look him up. He's got a
I
bunch of good
will.
ones for that.
Yeah.
Um, I also have found in this kind of process that there are some people that are like they want to be completely open kimono about stuff and they're just like, yeah, I know that I could go read a bunch of articles about how to ace the interview, but I'm just going to be completely honest and it's like, okay, this is refreshing and also don't like why did you tell me that? So there's a little bit of a give and take. I think it's a bit refreshing if people are just like, yeah, we're not gonna dance around this thing. You're getting like I tried to disguise a question about like tell me something that like the weakness question. I basically was like, is there something about you that maybe if it popped up in like the job environment would surprise us or any way that we can set you up for success in terms of personality wise? And the answer that one guy gave was like sometimes I get tunnel vision and I'm working on a project and I forget to do other stuff. And I was like, perfect, good answer.
Yeah.
And then I asked it again and I think I phrased it less good because it was like the third one of the day or whatever. And he goes, "Oh, so you're asking about like weaknesses." And I was like, "Yes." So at least you've picked up on this. But
Yeah.
there are some people I've found that at least recently, way more than like 5 years ago, that people are much more willing to just be like, "Yes, this is me. Like if you want me, I'm here, and these are my questions." And I found that shift a little bit interesting because there's a lot of like guidebooks and articles and tips on how to ace the
Right.
interview and these are the questions that you need to ask and if you don't ask these questions and this is how you negotiate for salary and this is how you do all these other things. There's other people that are like, yeah, I want to make this much. Like, okay, cool. I can that's good. Then we don't have to play this game of like, what do you actually want? Are you going high? So we give you low offer, like all those things. I don't have you experienced that or seen that as well as in the shift recently?
Yeah. Yes, I do. I can relate to what you're saying. And I think it depends on the person, but I have seen a bit more of it. And probably it has to do with is it an employer's market or an employee market? And
Mm,
for the past few years, unemployment has been pretty low and there's been more jobs than there are available people. And so I think even if you go back 2 years ago, it was a really strong job market and people felt like they could leave their current employer or, it was easy to find a job pretty quickly. And so they just became brutally honest. And in some ways that's good, right? Of like, this is what I want, take it or leave it, kind of attitude. That will shift if we start to see that there are more people than there are jobs available. And if we start to see that unemployment number rise, it will definitely kind of change the tides of how people handle themselves in interviews.
yeah, I think a lot of that as well had to do with the some companies were like doing return to office, and people were like, nope, not
No,
doing it. Uh,
right.
there's definitely been a big push, I think, from a lot of people. Are you familiar with Patrick Bet David at all? Does that name ring a bell?
Nope. You
He
got me
works
two
in
that I can't think.
well, so he was working in like he was running a big insurance company for a while, and on he's got a big podcast, a couple million subscribers or whatever, and
Oh,
he's
wow.
always on there saying like people need to be in the office to work. And I'm sitting there like, well, yes, however, if I don't have my commute time and I have more time with my wife, and then you get a happier version of Eric, then you get a more productive version of Eric, and you should probably like that. And so I get from both sides, and so I think I mean, obviously this is kind of industry dependent on what it is, but like for the I'll say like information or like the thinking jobs that you don't really need to be in person. There's still a level of collaboration that I think is good being in the office. But what are you seeing across the board in terms of like employers pushing for it, employees being okay with it, not okay with it? Obviously, at the beginning of Trump's administration, all the federal workforce went back
Right.
into the office 5 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what are you seeing with that from employer and employee side? Is it gonna shake itself out and be like a nice hybrid mix, or is there still gonna be some conflict there? Or like are some industries gonna struggle, do you think, maybe?
Yeah, I think that we definitely have seen a movement of more people coming back into the office. Maybe not full time, but some kind of hybrid schedule, virtual work is still going to be very popular. And I think companies are still embracing that they can allow their employees to work virtually. But they do realize the benefit of having them in an office occasionally to collaborate and have those conversations and work together and really drive up productivity. So I do think it's a balance. I am not seeing a like hard line that you have to come back into the office. Of course, there are certain jobs that do require you to be present, but that's always been the case. But as far as like the office jobs, there's a lot more flexibility around that.
Yeah. Well, um, where should the people go if they want to buy your book or support you or see what it is that they're doing or that you're doing rather?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I do have a website, so they could go to www.joaniebily.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And the book is also available, um, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, but you can get it on my website as well. The thing about the book that I didn't mention to you is that 100% of proceeds of the book, of actually all sales, actually go to a scholarship foundation for women in leadership. And so even though the book is, whether it's for men or women, I've donated all the sales of the book to a scholarship fund to really help promote women in leadership roles. So if anyone's interested, they can buy the book and hopefully enjoy it and know that the dollars went to a good cause as well.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Do you have any last nickels before we get you out of here?
Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun to talk with you. I really enjoyed hearing about your internship, as well. But I would just say my advice to everyone is to really dream big and think about, what do you want your career to look like? What do you want your life to look like? Think about that design phase, and don't regret that, like 20 years from now, that you're going to look back at your life and say, gosh, I wish I would have tried this, or I should have made more of an effort, or kind of went for this, or pursued that dream or that goal. So don't have any regrets. Think about what you want to accomplish, dream big, and I'll say dive in deep and go for it. So
Very, very well said. Very well said. For those listening, links to all that stuff will be in the description as always. Go check it out. Go check the book out on Amazon, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace. Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you want to watch another episode like this one, click there. If you want to subscribe, click there.